Okay, today we're going to make some Neurobasses using only operator and built-in effects, which are going to sound like this. All right, let's do it. Okay, so today we're going to make a Neurobass. We're going to use operator because it's awesome. And the first thing we're going to do is going to change the algorithm from this FM kind of mode to this straight out for oscillator mode. So the straight across one, which means that each oscillator is just going to come out as its own voice, well, as its own oscillator as part of the voice. So currently we've just got a sine wave, and we're going to change that to a square. So this is what we've got now. I'm going to bring in a second square. And at the moment they're tuned perfectly together. So they just, as we bring this one in, it just increases the volume of both of them, which is not what we want. We want them to offset and phase off each other. So we're going to bring up the fine tuning a little on the first one. And on this second one, we can bring the coarse down to 0.5, which means it's playing an octave below. And we can bring the fine all the way up. And now it's back to the pitch that was originally at, and we'll bring it down a little bit as well. So now these two are offset from the center frequency a little bit in each side. You can hear they're phasing against each other nicely. Now this third oscillator, we could bring in another one. So we'll bring in a saw for now, and we'll put it on course 2, which is double the pitch of our main note. And we'll just wind in the level as it plays. So that sounds nice and tough. Now what we can do to have a little bit more control over this moving forwards, we can build an instrument rack, so just Command G. We'll put the fine for both of the first two oscillators on the one knob. We'll hit the map button. And so for oscillator A, which has course 1, we want the detuning to go from 0 to maybe 100. For oscillator B, which has course of 0.5, we want the tuning to go from 1000, which is the top of the dial, to 900. So it goes down the same amount as the other one goes up. So now we can detune our oscillators. If we get rid of that third oscillator for now. We've got a lot of control now about the rate of that beating and that phasing effect. So now we can fine-tune the levels and the phasing relationships. Of course, you can still modify the course on this saw. I'm still just going to land on 2 for now. Okay, so we've got a really rich over-the-top synthetic sound now. So let's destroy it a little bit. We've got a bandpass here. All right, now that's starting to sound a little neuro-y. So we've called this knob detune, and I've just mapped the filter frequency of the cutoff over to here. We'll leave that as filter frequency. So obviously we lose a whole bunch of volume when we use a bandpass. So we want to compress this a fair bit. I'm going to use Glue Compressor a little. Oh, can't even hear it. All right, so we're using the compression to squish things down a bit, and we're using makeup gain to bring the levels back up. Cool. So that's a bit more consistent. We can keep compressing. This is really a taste thing, depending on how squished you want your signal. That's nice and loud. Actually, I'll take off makeup gain. Cool, that's nice and loud. Now you notice we're starting to get a little bit of a neuro sweepy vibe anyway. Let's put in a note. I like to use F, but you know, you can choose any note you like as long as it's F. And now we want to automate this frequency cutoff. So we're going for some nice fast movements with lots of articulation. And it's important to use curves on these because those curves really give you the sweepy, typical effect that you're probably after. All right, we can kind of muck around here. This is really the experimental part of the whole process, just dialing these into how you want. I'm going to speed this up a bit. Okay, so now we've got this. Cool, so that's a pretty reasonable little thing. We'll get a lot of nice samples out of this. Now you notice if we check this out in span, this is using my own span preset, so it's not what span normally looks like, but it should be pretty representative of the sound. Now you notice mostly it's just sub, so we want to rebalance the sound a whole bit. And I really like channel EQ for this because it just gives you broad strokes. So we want to bring the lows down, we want to bring the highs up, maybe we want to duck a few mids and then sweep this around to find a nice point. I think that's sounding pretty nice. We can still balance this out a little bit further. Same kind of deal. Now you notice we've lost some volume again, so we can re-glue it. Cool. So we're getting some pretty nice sounds. Let's get a reverb in there. Reverb's really important for adding some space to this whole thing. I like to use high quality mode. Decay time there is fine. And dry wet should be pretty low because the compression is going to suck the reverb tails back up. Cool. Now we can bring some more modulation into all of this. Put a chorus somewhere in here. And all of this is really just trial and error from this point. Now that we've got a nice bass sound, we can kind of just look around for sweet spots with effects and modulation. Cool, so I quite like that. Let's see if we can get a phaser going on. Maybe wide, and we'll chuck it towards the end, and we'll bring the dry wet down a little. Okay, so I don't like that LFO shape. And I feel like we can rebalance this a little bit further. Let's use EQ8 this time. I'm going to use it in mid-side mode because I can see in span that we can get rid of some of this side lows. And in the mids, we can just shelf down the lows a little bit. And we can re-glue it again. Too much. Okay, now we could try messing with the original sound a little bit to get different versions out of this. We could also try adding an erosion to get a bit more hiss going on. Too much. And we can probably use a bit of an overdrive. Up till now we haven't really used much distortion, so we've still got quite a clean sound. So we're getting some pretty nice sweeps out of that. Now the cool thing is with Live 10, you can modify the automation in pretty interesting ways. Let's speed it all up. Yeah, that one's a little too fast. Okay, let's duplicate this Get rid of that peak there. We'll get rid of that. We'll make this a bit more like that. Then you can grab these little handles to just modify the shapes of things. So maybe we want to speed this section up here and duplicate it and then slow it back down again. So we get this. Now, because it's so easy to change the modulation here, because we're not really modulating 15 different things, we're just modulating the filter cutoff and then seeing the impact. It's really easy to take heaps of different resamples of the same thing. Making sure that you've got some sort of clipper or limiter at the end of your chain. We've got Glue Compressor on soft clipping. We'll chuck a limiter on there as well, just in case. Let's take a copy of this. Okay, so that's one, well, not loop, that's one sample we could use down the track. Let's continue mucking around with the automation here. So we can resample that. Now, because these are really thick, rich sounds to start with, they'll take a lot more filtering if you want to keep doing it. So let's grab another filter on here. And I'm not saying that you'd want to do this as part of this process now, but when you're actually ready to use these sounds in a track, you can continue to filter them because they've got so many harmonics in there. They'll still survive a fair bit of creative filtering beyond this. Okay, and so on our resampled ones, obviously, because we're using a filter, we can re-glue these a bit. We could even put reverb on there again, which you'll probably want to do when you're using them in a tune. And as a quick example, let's drag in some drums. I've made a quick loop just using what we resampled earlier, and here's what it sounds like. That was making Neurobass using operator and built-in effects. I really like this because it gives you a nice controllable clean sound and gives you pretty predictable results. So it's easy to like dial in something that you want, particularly for a track that's already under progress. It's also really great for just making your own samples to use later.